When they rolled into Bucha, they set the stage for the terror that was to define the Ukraine war. The soldiers who became known as the Butchers of Bucha ran rampant, murdering civilians and proving that Russia had no intention of following the rules of engagement. War crimes started early, and Ukraine vowed revenge. Now that revenge has come. Russia's Butchers of Bucha just got butchered themselves. Ukraine has delivered some long-awaited justice after years of waiting. These are historic kills. Butchers have been eradicated, and now Ukraine may have its sights set on an even bigger target as it continues its campaign to bring the beasts who massacred so many in Bucha to justice. On May 30th, the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, the notorious Robert Brovdy, reported that Ukraine had pulled off an amazing strike against the training grounds and military camps used by both Russia's 3rd and 36th Combined Arms Armies. The overnight drone operation, which happened just hours before Brovdy's revelation, was yet another example of how the medium-range campaign that Ukraine has launched in 2026 is proving more effective than Putin ever thought possible. But the real headline from the strike would have sent shockwaves of joy rippling through any Ukrainians who remember the horrors that Putin's forces unleashed during the early weeks of the invasion. It wasn't just training grounds that Ukraine hit on May 30th. The positions of Russia's 64th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade were also struck. For those who don't know, this is the very brigade that entered Bucha and committed atrocity after atrocity against Ukraine's civilians. And Brovdy had plenty to say about the people whom he and so many of his country people consider to be among the most irredeemable within Russia's ranks. The lowest of the low, the 64th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade of the 35th Army, which ran riot in Bucha in 2022, was hit, Brovdy roared. As for how, Pravda has the details. The outlet says that Ukraine unleashed the 414th Magyars Birds Separate Brigade on the Butchers, which is a unit that bears Brovdy's call sign. That unit teamed up with the 413th Raid Separate Regiment to utterly ruin the Butchers of Bucha. The two units coordinated their assault via the newly created Deep Strike Center of the Unmanned Systems Forces, which Ukraine created back in April to help it organize the increasingly intense medium-range strike campaign that it's waging against Russia. The idea is to ensure a systematic approach is taken to these types of strikes, while also ensuring that different units can cooperate to cause maximum damage when a target is identified. That's precisely what happened during the night of May 29th and into the early hours of May 30th. Ukraine's collaborating units managed to score a total of 21 confirmed hits against Russian targets during a night of strikes that devastated Russia's occupiers. But the highlight of the night was the attack against the Butchers, and there can be no doubt that Ukraine did precisely what it claimed to have done. How do we know? Well, there's footage that shows us everything. Published on Facebook by Brovdy himself, the video is made up of clips shot by drones as they zero in on what the Unmanned Systems Forces commander calls the lair of the 64th Worm Brigade. Several times over, we see the same thing. A drone homes in on its target, then it scores a direct hit. With each drone that follows, we see the results of those that came before. Massive fires have erupted all over the target areas, sending plumes of smoke into the skies. Ukraine's drones navigate the flames to find targets that aren't yet burning, and they make sure that changes. Hit after hit is recorded. Ukraine's drones created an inescapable inferno. Frankly, there can be no better justice delivered to the Butchers of Bucha. They reveled in the horrors they created. Now they've been burned to ashes by flames so hot that they must have felt like hell. Ukraine is still investigating all of the footage that its drones captured to determine just how much damage they did to the Butchers of Bucha and the training grounds that we mentioned earlier. Some of the early figures are in. So far, Ukraine has confirmed 31 personnel casualties among Russia's 64th Brigade. 9 of the Butchers of Bucha are dead. Another 9 have been injured, though we don't know how severely. As for the other 13 Butchers, their whereabouts are currently unknown. But there is more footage to watch, more revenge to report. It seems likely that many of the 13, and perhaps more besides, are also dead. Brovdy certainly thinks so. Most likely these figures are significantly underestimated, Brovdy reports. That will certainly be the case, as Ukraine hasn't released casualty figures for its strikes against the pair of training sites we mentioned earlier in the video. However, Brovdy seems to also be implying that yet more of the Butchers burn. That wouldn't be a surprise. Of the 21 strikes that Ukraine carried out on May 30th, 8 specifically targeted the Worm's Lair. The fires don't lie. Any soldiers who were still in that lair when Ukraine struck would almost certainly be casualties. There were also the other strikes we mentioned. Ukraine's attack against Russia's Third Army saw it hit the Luhansk-based Tryoki-Zbenka training ground, which is about 70 kilometers from the front lines, Pravda reports. The 36th Army training ground, which is the one that was being used by the Butchers of Bucha, is in occupied Zaporizhia and is about 100 kilometers away from the front lines. Ukraine also struck a gas storage facility in the town of Yenikiyeva in occupied Donetsk, and to cap it all off, Ukraine also struck Russian logistics in both Donetsk and Luhansk, demonstrating how Ukraine will still always focus on weakening Russia's military, even when it has revenge on its collective mind. This is Ukraine's Middle Strike campaign in action, and it's a campaign that has been wreaking havoc on Russia's occupiers. The Ukraine war has entered a new phase since the introduction of medium-range drones into Ukraine's arsenal. In the past few years, Ukraine's drones have operated at limited tactical depth. Sure, it had long-range drones capable of penetrating hundreds of kilometers into Russia, but those drones weren't typically used in the occupied territories. They were too valuable for that, as the damage they could do to the war machine inside Russia, including the country's oil refineries and industrial targets, outweighed the benefit that would have come from unleashing them on the near rear. Beyond that, Ukraine had FPV drones that typically operated in the range of 10 to 25 kilometers. In 2026, all of that has changed. Now Ukraine has drones that are cost-effective and can strike targets in the range of 30 to around 200 kilometers from the front lines. That opens up a host of new targets, from Russian command centers controlling assaults on the front to logistical infrastructure and, as we saw on May 30th, troop gatherings. UNN says that new medium drones are allowing Ukraine to build a new kill zone, stretching deeper than anything that has been created before. The Butchers of Bucha just found themselves within one of those kill zones. As devastating as the loss of some of his favorite war criminals will be to Putin, he'll be far more worried about what Ukraine pulling off this strike means for his troops psychologically. The Butchers of Bucha were deep behind the front lines in Zaporizhia. They were supposed to be safe, as is the case for all of the soldiers that Russia stations behind the front. Safety is no longer guaranteed. Every soldier within 200 kilometers of the front lines now knows that the intense inferno that just claimed the lives of at least 9 of the Butchers of Bucha could be coming for them at any time. They won't know when it's coming. Their air defenses won't be able to stop it. No matter where Putin's patsies are in the occupied territories, they'll know that Ukraine can hit them. That's the sort of terror that is unique to the Ukraine war. The Butchers of Bucha deserve that terror and so much more. When they rampaged through the settlement from which they take their name, they inflicted horrors unlike anything that should be seen in modern war. Those horrors are what make the May 30th revenge strike conducted by Ukraine so important. Ukraine waited, it searched, and once it found the Butchers, it delivered justice. But justice for what exactly? We've implied what the Butchers of Bucha did to deserve their fate a few times, but we're about to reveal just how horrific their actions truly were. But before we do, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to hit that button so you can see more videos like this one. On March 4th, 2022, the Russian forces that were attempting to push into Kyiv during the initial weeks of Putin's supposed special military operation arrived in the town of Bucha. Strategically, that town would have been significant if the invasion had gone to Russia's plan. Located about 30 kilometers northwest of Kyiv, Bucha would have potentially provided Russia's forces with a route into Ukraine's capital. Between March 4th and March 31st, 2022, Bucha was occupied. Then, in early April 2022, the Russian soldiers withdrew as Ukraine pushed Russia's initial invading force back. It was in April that the horrors that the Butchers of Bucha carried out truly came to light. Human Rights Watch researchers spent a week in the town detailing their findings. Extensive evidence of the unlawful summary execution of dozens of civilians was discovered, as was evidence of torture, enforced disappearances and other war crimes. Nearly every corner in Bucha is now a crime scene, and it felt like death was everywhere. The evidence indicates that Russian forces occupying Bucha showed contempt and disregard for civilian life and the most fundamental principles of the laws of war, Richard Weir, who is one of those researchers, said at the time. It wasn't long after that the numbers revealed the true scale of the Butchers' work. Ruslan Kravchenko, who is the chief regional prosecutor in Bucha, told Human Rights Watch that 278 bodies have been discovered in his town following the withdrawal of Russia's forces. Very few of those bodies belonged to soldiers. Most of the dead were civilians, and Kravchenko expected that more would be found following his April 15th revelation. Later reports, including one from PBS Frontline, revealed that Russia had tried to conduct what the outlet described as a cleansing operation in the town. Many of those who died were in lists prepared by the Russian intelligence services. Volunteer fighters and anybody suspected of helping Ukraine's soldiers were targets. The Butchers of Bucha went door to door asking questions. If anybody failed to pass the test, they were dragged away for torture and in many cases execution. This wasn't the case of a military unit losing itself in war, it was calculated, planned. A systematic eradication of people that Russia thought, though often didn't know, were threats. The street of Yablunska was the site of so much of the horror in Bucha. By the end of Russia's rampage, almost 40 bodies had been piled up on that street alone, with many of the dead having faced horrific interrogation at a nondescript office building on the street. Years later, in June 2025, footage emerged showing how the Butchers of Bucha targeted their victims. Published by Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty, the video shows Russian soldiers marauding through the streets. We see rifles pointed at civilians, people being marched away with their hands around the backs of their heads. Russian soldiers kick out at those being guided away. We don't see the worst of what Russia did, but we see enough. Bucha became a monument to the evil that Putin wished to inflict on Ukraine, and naturally there was an outcry. By the end of April 2022, Ukrainian prosecutors had already filed the first charges against Russia over the massacre in Bucha. 10 of Russia's soldiers were accused of crimes including looting, torture, and murder. All were members of the 64th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade that had an up-close and personal meeting with Ukraine's drones on May 30th. Many more charges would follow, and in some cases, Russian soldiers involved in the butchery developed something resembling a conscience, to the point where they admitted their crimes. One soldier named Nikolai Katashev was interviewed by Ukrainian authorities. "I was ordered to," he said, when asked why he had shot a civilian. "Everyone in black was considered an enemy. If we saw a man in black, we opened fire." There may have been a list of people that Russia wanted to eliminate, but this confession alone tells of a unit that was ordered to kill anybody who fit the vaguest of descriptions. Katashev may have been caught, but he was one of the few. According to reporting, investigators in Bucha had identified around 8,000 suspected war crime cases arising from the month that Russia spent in the city by the end of April 2022. Many were members of the 64th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, but Ukraine knew that it had little chance of bringing those soldiers to justice in a traditional fashion. Putin had no intention of punishing his soldiers. Several were awarded medals for their actions, as Putin praised the 64th for its heroism and courage. There is still very little prospect of bringing the majority of the Butchers of Bucha to trial. Ukraine knows who it's looking for. It has published pictures and names of many of those who committed the vicious crimes in Bucha. However, Russia protects its war criminals, all the way up to Putin himself. And up until recently, that protection came in the form of keeping those criminals deep enough behind the front lines that they couldn't be struck by Ukraine's drones. May 30th changed everything for the Butchers of Bucha. Now these torturers and murderers know that they can never be safe from Ukraine's wrath, no matter where they might be hiding. If justice can't be doled out through the courts, Ukraine has decided to take matters into its own hands. And though May 30th may represent one of the most impressive strikes against the Butchers of Bucha yet seen, it isn't the only one. Slowly but surely, Ukraine is working on delivering the vengeance that all of those who were involved in the massacre at Bucha have earned. Ukraine's past strikes have been much smaller in scale than we saw on May 30th, though they have been effective, both in terms of eliminating butchers and sending messages to those who have survived. Toward the end of August 2025, Ukraine took out 3 of the Butchers of Bucha when it attacked 6 Russian soldiers who were trying to shelter themselves in occupied Luhansk. 3 of the soldiers were killed in the attack, and all 6 were identified as being involved in the war crimes committed in Bucha over 3 years prior. The attack was more akin to an assassination than a strike. A detonation in the parking lot of the building where the 6 were hiding is what killed 3 of them, suggesting an element of sabotage behind enemy lines had taken place. Fast forward to the end of April, and Ukraine conducted another assassination attempt. This time, a bomb planted in the Khabarovsk region of Russia killed 1 and injured 7. The few details that have emerged from the attack suggest that it was carried out inside a closed military barracks, meaning Ukraine had somebody working on the inside, and that the man killed was somebody who had the rank of lieutenant colonel. However, the dead man wasn't the true target. CNN reports that Russian military bloggers believe that Ukraine's intended target was Major General Azatbek Amurbakov. He was in command of the 64th when it committed its atrocities in Bucha. Amurbakov got lucky. The bomb intended to take his life appears to have killed one of his subordinates. But now he's on notice. Ukraine knows who he is and where he goes. Whether it's a bomb or a long-range drone, Ukraine intends to take Amurbakov out. But for now, Ukraine will be happy to make do with at least 31 casualties among the brigade that Amurbakov led. One by one, the Butchers of Bucha are being held to account for their crimes. and there is one more who will be in Ukraine's sights. On May 8th, Eurasia Review reported on some changes that have taken place in the Russian military high command. The head of the Russian Aerospace Forces, General Viktor Avzalov, is no more. He has been fired and replaced by a career ground forces officer named Colonel General Alexander Chaiko. You may be able to guess where this is going. Chaiko is one of the men who is responsible for the massacre in Bucha, and he commanded Russia's eastern military district at the time that it happened. Ukraine had already indicted Chaiko, and the European Union has imposed sanctions against him for his role in what happened in Bucha. Now, Putin has rewarded Chaiko with a position for which he is in no way suited, and in doing so, he has put a target on another butcher's head. Chaiko may be the next target as Ukraine systematically dismantles the unit responsible for what happened in Bucha. Or he may not. That's the true trick. Ukraine has proven that it can take out butchers with drones and sabotage operations. Now, the remaining members of the 64th who killed and tortured in Bucha will all be asking themselves the same question: am I next? They won't get their answers until Ukraine is prepared to unleash its brand of fiery justice once more on the Butchers of Bucha. Revenge will wait for the rest of the butchers. But as Ukraine shatters a unit that committed war crimes by the thousands, it's also taking revenge in other ways. A brutal Russian missile assault left 24 dead in Kyiv earlier this year. Ukraine didn't let that stand. Russia erupted in giant fireballs as a massive long-range drone assault by Ukraine struck multiple regions. The Russian war machine suffered a crippling blow, and you can find out all about it if you watch our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show to see more of our coverage of Ukraine's devastating attacks against Russia. And thank you for watching.